In December 1989, Romania's communist regime collapsed in barely 10 days. What began as an isolated protest in Timișoara spread throughout the country, overwhelming the party, the army, and the feared security aid. The control apparatus broke from within. The dictator Nicolae Ceausescu, who had governed with an iron fist for more than 2 decades, suddenly faced a nation in open rebellion. Attempts to regain control failed one after another. The capital became the scene of an unprecedented uprising that culminated with his capture and execution. What exactly happened during those decisive days? How was it possible for absolute power to dissolve in real time? And why was his brutal execution televised? The rebellion that no one could stop the collapse of the regime. The cutting cold of December 1989 enveloped the cobblestone streets of Timișoara when Laszlo Tok, a Hungarian Protestant pastor, refused to abandon his modest dwelling on Timotei Cipariu Street. The Romanian authorities had ordered his eviction for his public criticism of Nicolae's regime. What began as a community defense of the cleric would transform into the first act of the revolution that would overthrow the last communist bastion of Eastern Europe. On December 16th, a crowd congregated in front of the pastor's home. For hours, hundreds of people chanted religious slogans that gradually became political shouts against the Romanian Communist Party. The tension was palpable in the frozen air while the Securitate, the feared secret police, watched from the shadows. At dawn on December 17th, security forces attempted to disperse the protesters with tear gas and water cannons. The situation escalated rapidly when army troops received orders from the Ministry of Defense to open fire against the crowd. The first shots resonated in Opera Square like the echo of an era coming to its end. Dozens of bodies fell on the pavement while protesters ran seeking refuge. The municipal hospital of Timișoara became a dance scene, the hallways filled with wounded and unidentified corpses. According to military records subsequently revealed, some bodies were secretly transferred to Bucharest to be cremated without authorization in a desperate attempt to hide the magnitude of the massacre. But terror did not extinguish the flame of resistance. On December 18th, confrontations continued with greater intensity. The city found itself under virtual military occupation with tanks patrolling the main streets and soldiers posted on every corner. However, something had changed in the behavior of the troops. Some soldiers began to show hesitation, refusing to shoot against unarmed civilians. December 19th marked a decisive turning point. Thousands of workers from large factories like Electrotes and Ella abandoned their work posts and joined the demonstrations. A general strike completely paralyzed the industrial activity of the region. The protesters occupied Victoria Square using megaphones and improvised loudspeakers to read declarations against the government. Images captured by foreign cameras and clandestine VHS video recordings show endless columns of workers advancing between tanks and armored vehicles. There were no direct confrontations, but a silent determination that was more terrifying than any violence. On the morning of December 20th, a unit from the Ministry of Defense made a decision that would change the course of history. They publicly announced that they would not shoot against citizens. That afternoon, Timișoara proclaimed itself as the first free city of Romania. The declarations were recorded and transmitted through foreign media like Radio Free Europe and the BBC, bypassing state censorship. Nicolae Ceaușescu, who was on an official visit to Iran, was informed of the events through encrypted communications. Upon returning that same night to Bucharest, his face showed a mixture of perplexity and fury. He accused foreign forces and Hungarian fascists of being behind the agitation, refusing to recognize the true nature of the popular uprising. By December 21st, demonstrations had spread like an uncontrolled fire to cities like Cebu, Cluj, Brasov, and finally to the capital. The protesters were mostly young people, students, factory workers, and even some military personnel. They had grown up knowing only Ceausescu's regime, but now they openly defied the only system they had known. Faced with a country that was crumbling, Ceausescu decided to organize a massive demonstration of power. He summoned 100,000 people to the center of Bucharest for a rally in front of the Central Committee headquarters in Palace Square. Many were state employees and party members transported under threat of losing their jobs and forced to carry pro-government banners. The event was broadcast live on national television. When Nicolae Ceausescu appeared on the building's balcony, he began his speech with the usual authoritarian tone, praising the socialist revolution and condemning the riots in Timișoara as acts of fascist hooligans. However, within a few minutes, shouts and boos emerged from the back of the square. The ambient sound, a recording of cheers used to amplify the impression of popular support, became confused. Ceausescu, visibly surprised, raised his arm, trying to restore control. His voice became insecure while he offered salary and pension increases in a desperate attempt to calm the crowd. Elena Ceausescu approached him, murmuring words of encouragement, but the damage was already done. The cameras captured the dictator's face, showing total bewilderment. For the first time in decades, his authoritarian image had been publicly challenged before millions of viewers. The transmission was briefly interrupted, and when it returned, it showed only general shots of the sky and buildings without direct audio. During the night of December 21st to 22nd, riots intensified. Protesters remained in the square throughout the early morning, being repressed with tear gas and armored vehicles. The asphalt was stained red while security forces tried to maintain control of a situation that had already escaped their hands. At 9:30 in the morning of December 22nd, the death of Defense Minister Vasily Malaya was officially announced. Although the official statement alleged suicide, later versions suggest he was executed for disobeying Ceausescu's orders to repress with greater harshness. This event provoked an irreversible rupture in the military command structure. Immediately after, the army announced its withdrawal from operations against the population. Complete units began to fraternize with protesters, delivering weapons, directing tanks toward party buildings, and distributing food among the congregated. The regime's repressive machine was disintegrating from within. Around midday, a crowd managed to penetrate the Central Committee building. Cameras captured chaotic scenes from the interior where mid-ranking officials tried to destroy compromising documents. Protesters discovered secret underground passages designed to facilitate the escape of high-ranking officials in case of emergency. On the building's roof, a helicopter waited for Ceausescu and his closest circle. Television cameras captured their evacuation in real time. Elena and Nicolae Ceausescu were practically carried by their escorts toward the aircraft. The helicopter piloted by Colonel Vasil Malutin took off at 12:08 noon while the crowd invaded the symbol of communist power. On the ground, the takeover of the building was complete. Romanian flags with the communist coat of arms cut out waved from broken windows. Super VHS recordings capture civilians entering official offices, removing portraits of the dictator and transmitting improvised messages by radio. The fall of the seat of power was the final act of the regime in the capital. In a matter of hours, national television changed its programming and began broadcasting communiques from a self-denominated National Salvation Front. The army deployed protection forces at strategic points, no longer to defend the regime but to maintain order in a city without operative government. Hunted by history, the flight of the Ceaușescus. The military helicopter Europter DOA rose precariously from the roof of the Central Committee shortly after noon on December 22nd. Lieutenant Colonel Vasily Malutan struggled with the controls while his co-pilot Stelika navigated through increasingly hostile airspace. In the rear cabin, Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu found themselves accompanied by two high officials and two escorts exceeding the aircraft's nominal capacity. Malutan would later recall that both leaders arrived practically carried by their bodyguards with faces haggard by terror. During the 15 minutes that the flight over Bucharest lasted, the pilot received multiple threats by radio about possible anti-aircraft attacks. The city that once venerated them now expelled them as enemies. The helicopter headed north, flying over the capital suburbs until reaching Lake Snugago, where Ceaușescu maintained one of his official residences. The landing occurred around 12:15 in a wooded area far from main routes. For the first time in decades, the Ceaușescus found themselves without the security apparatus that had protected them. At Snagov, the reality of their situation began to manifest. The crew and escorts tried to organize their protection, but communications with Bucharest revealed that the central government had collapsed. Without available official reinforcements, they decided to move by road toward a safer location. The dictator and his wife were escorted in civilian automobiles on winding forest roads. Their destination was the Agricultural Training Institute on the outskirts of Targoist, a rural and isolated facility where they hoped to find temporary refuge. The journey of more than 80 kilometers was carried out in 3 different vehicles, changing automobiles each time suspicions of pursuit arose. Around 2:00 p.m., they arrived at the Agricultural Institute. The administrative building, surrounded by cultivated fields and forests, seemed to offer the discretion they needed. However, their presence did not go unnoticed. A local military patrol had received reports about suspicious movements in the area and proceeded to close all accesses to the compound. The institute's director, faced with an unprecedented situation, confined the couple in an administrative office while contacting authorities. By 2:30 p.m., local police agents entered the compound with specific detention orders. The days of absolute power had ended abruptly. The Ceaușescus were formally arrested and their escorts relieved by a military unit from the Targovis barracks. An official detention record was issued, their identifications were registered, and classified documents they carried with them were confiscated. The transfer to the military barracks was carried out without incidents under strict armed custody. The military base of Targovist became their prison. They were admitted to an interior cell of 3x4 m equipped with a metal bunk, functional bathroom, and an aluminum table with 2 chairs. The austerity of the space contrasted dramatically with the golden palaces they had inhabited for decades. During the following days, custody was exercised by barrack soldiers in rotating shifts armed with automatic rifles. All communication facilities were disconnected, leaving them completely isolated from the outside world. Visits were strictly limited to military tribunal officers and authorized medical personnel. On December 23rd and 24th, designated officers conducted formal interrogations. Official records reflect the tense nature of these encounters. Nicolae Ceaușescu systematically refused to recognize the tribunal's authority, insisting on his condition as legitimate leader of the country. His answers were curt and defiant, rejecting any procedure that did not emanate from the Grand National Assembly. Elena Ceaușescu adopted a different attitude. Although she responded to formal questions about her official role and activities in the State Council, she did so with visible disdain toward her interrogators. She did not question the interrogation format, but her answers revealed a complete disconnection from the political reality developing outside the barracks walls. The assigned soldiers carefully documented their observations. Their subsequent testimonies described the prisoners as defiant but not violent, maintaining an attitude of dignity even in confinement. Both categorically refused the use of handcuffs or shackles except during mandatory transfers within the facilities. The barracks isolation was strict until December 24th, when the presence of military tribunal officers was permitted. There was no access for media or general public. Perimeter security was maintained with constant patrols and control points on all access routes. Pilot Malutan's logbook, preserved in the archives, laconically records 1515, 22nd December 89, received evacuation order excessive load. We transported 6 people in rear compartment. They showed resistance to the procedure, landing at Snugov without incidents. This technical document marks the end of an era of absolute power and the beginning of a rapid descent toward trial and execution. Trial in real time, the last sentence of Romanian communism. The dawn of December 24, 1989, brought with it the decision that would seal the fate of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu in Bucharest. On Iliescu and the leaders of the newly formed National Salvation Front deliberated about the future of the detainees. Popular pressure demanded immediate justice, while political instability demanded a quick and definitive solution. Iliescu signed the decree creating an extraordinary military tribunal with full powers to issue sentence and order immediate execution. The document established exceptional procedures justified by revolutionary circumstances and the need to stabilize the country. The trial was scheduled for the following day, December 25th, at 13 or 20 hours. The tribunal's composition reflected the urgency of the moment. Colonel Ghica Popa, president of the Military Tribunal of Bucharest, was designated to preside over the court. He was accompanied by Major Dan Voia, who would act simultaneously as judge and military prosecutor along with other mid-ranking officers. The concentration of roles in the same persons eliminated the typical controls of a normal judicial process. The defense lawyers Nicolae Teodorescu and Captain Constantin Lucescu were assigned directly by the FSN without prior consultation with the accused. They had not had previous contact with their clients, nor access to evidentiary material. The room where the process would unfold was a small space conditioned in the military unit's headquarters without access for press or external observers. The formal charges presented against the Ceaușescus covered decades of alleged crimes. The first charge, genocide, accused them of the murder of more than 60,000 Romanian citizens through systematic repression, torture, and lethal use of the army against the population. The second charge focused on the subversion of state power through the maintenance of a totalitarian regime. The third charge concerned the destruction of the national economy, including policies that led to widespread impoverishment and forced rationing. The fourth charge dealt with flight with state funds, alleging the attempt to extract approximately $1 billion deposited in foreign accounts for personal use by the family. The trial formally began at 13:20 on December 25th in an atmosphere of extreme tension. Both Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu immediately adopted a posture of total defiance toward the tribunal. Nicolae declared with a firm voice that he did not recognize the tribunal's authority, insisting that only the Grand National Assembly could judge him. Elena adopted an equally combative attitude, qualifying the entire process as a plot designed to eliminate them. Her interventions were charged with indignation and disdain toward the judges. She flatly refused to sign any document and rejected the assistance of lawyers who did not know her. The defense had an intervention space of barely 7 minutes in total. The assigned lawyers tried to request additional time to review the file but were denied by the tribunal's president. The formal reading of charges took 18 minutes, followed by 12 minutes of prosecution reply. After barely 10 minutes of closed deliberation, the judges returned with the verdict. Both accused were declared guilty of all presented charges. The sentence was unanimous. Death penalty by firing squad to be executed immediately without possibility of appeal. At 1425, Ion Iliescu ratified the sentence through emergency presidential decree. The document established the impossibility of postponement, citing reasons of national security, and authorized partial recording of the procedure. The entire trial lasted exactly 55 minutes from the reading of charges to the issuance of the final sentence. The audiovisual record of the trial was captured by military technical equipment in standard video format. Romanian national television transmitted edited fragments on December 26th, omitting the most defiant expressions of the accused. The complete version was not released until 2004. The judicial process of the choses represented a summary procedure executed within the framework of institutional chaos following the regime's collapse. Although it complied with basic formalities, it was marked by the total absence of standard procedural guarantees without real access to effective defense or right to independent judicial review. Facing the wall, the most televised execution of the Cold War. At 1450 on December 25, 1989, 35 minutes after the sentence was issued, Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu were led to the exterior patio of Military Unit 0141 Sizin in Targo Vist. The place chosen for the execution was a brick wall of 2.4 meters in height, situated next to the complex's administration building. The space had been meticulously prepared. White chalk lines marked the exact positions where the condemned should be placed and the firing squad. The couple would be positioned against the wall, separated by 30 centimeters with arms against their bodies. By decision of the military command, no blindfolds would be used. 2 Sony PAL cameras were positioned at lateral and frontal angles to record the complete execution. The military technical team also installed ambient audio recording equipment, although with limitations in voice capture at distance. Audiovisual documentation was considered essential to confirm the dictator's death. The firing squad was composed of 8 paratrooper soldiers from the 2nd Paratrooper Regiment of Bane. They had been selected from 24 volunteers, all with advanced experience in precision shooting. The paratroopers carried AKM-47 automatic rifles with 30 cartridge magazines each. Orders specified shooting controlled bursts of 5 to 8 projectiles per shooter. Shooting distance was established at 6 meters without protective barrier between the squad and the condemned. Major Ionel Bueru, located at the center of the formation, would direct the execution commands. At 1445, Colonel Ghica Popa formally notified the sentence to the Ceaușescus in their cell. They were escorted by 2 guards toward the execution patio, walking on their own to the designated wall. Recordings show they refused offers of shackles and hood, maintaining dignified composure until the end. Military prosecutor Dan Voyer read the protocol aloud in front of the condemned. The tribunal has ordered the death penalty. It will be executed immediately in accordance with the military penal code. The words resonated in the silent patio while soldiers assumed their positions. In the final moments, both condemned pronounced their last words. Nicolae Ceaușescu shouted with a firm voice, Triasa Republica Socialistă România. Historia Maras Bună. Long live the Socialist Republic of Romania. History will avenge me. Elena Ceaușescu directed her last words to the prosecutor. Don't shoot. We have committed no crime. Both refused to be separated and demanded to die together. A petition that was accepted by the military command present. At 1:49:30, Major Bueru issued the order, Prepare. The 8 soldiers simultaneously raised their automatic rifles, aiming toward the condemned. At exactly 14:50, the final command resonated, Fire. The bursts were fired in perfect synchronization. Audio equipment recorded a continuous sequence of shots that lasted approximately 3 seconds. Cameras captured the moment from multiple angles, showing the immediate fall of both bodies. Subsequent technical analysis revealed that approximately 120 projectiles were fired in total. Impacts concentrated on chest, abdomen, and head of both condemned. Nicolae received 9 lethal projectiles, while Elena was hit by 7 direct impacts. The ammunition employed was 7.62's 39mm caliber Romanian Army standard, with full metal jacket projectiles fired at an exit velocity of 715 ms. Impact was instantaneous and lethal. Neither of the 2 condemned survived the first 2 seconds of concentrated fire. The military medical corps immediately proceeded to cover the corpses with military campaign blankets. At 17:30, a caravan of 2 military vehicles escorted by army patrols transferred the corpses to Bucharest. They were discreetly admitted to the Mina Minovici Legal Medicine Institute for formal identification. The limited autopsy performed in 1990 revealed specific details about the wounds. Nicolae Ceaușescu presented 9 penetrating wounds, 3 impacts in the thorax, 2 in abdomen, 1 in the right temporal skull, and 3 in extremities. Elena Ceaușescu had 7 impacts with entry through left thoracic region, abdomen, and 1 fatal cervical wound. The initial burial was carried out on December 30th at the Ghența Civil Cemetery in Bucharest. The coffins were deposited in graves without identification, marked only with numbered cement plaques. The presence of relatives, press or personnel from the previous regime was not permitted. The audiovisual material was edited and partially transmitted on December 26th by national television. Images showed the reading of the sentence and transfer to the wall, but omitted the exact moment of execution. The complete version remained classified until 2004. For millions of Romanians, the televised images represented definitive confirmation of the end of an era. The execution of the Ceaușescu became the most powerful symbol of communism's collapse in Eastern Europe, marking the violent end of 4 decades of totalitarian dictatorship. Ceaușescu, the cult of a dictator and the sinking of a nation. Nicolae Ceaușescu emerged from the penumbra of Romanian communist politics as a unique phenomenon in Cold War Europe. His transformation from minor party functionary to absolute dictator illustrates the rise of one of the most repressive regimes of the Soviet bloc, a system that would combine Stalinist terror with personal megalomania. Born in 1918 in a peasant family from Scornicest, Ceaușescu entered the clandestine communist movement as a teenager. His multiple imprisonments during the 1930s connected him with Gheorghe, future leader of communist Romania. This relationship forged in prison would determine his meteoric subsequent ascent. After liberation in August 1944, Ceaușescu quickly integrated into the Romanian Communist Party apparatus. His unconditional loyalty to Guioj took him from the Ministry of Agriculture to key military positions, reaching the rank of Major General. His primary function was the systematic purge of the army, eliminating unreliable elements and consolidating communist control over the armed forces. During these formative years, he actively participated in the elimination of political opposition, forced collectivization of agriculture, and implementation of state terror. The period from 1945 to 1965 constituted his definitive political education in the most brutal methods of totalitarian power. Giorgio Deji's death in 1965 opened the opportunity that Ceaușescu had waited for decades. His nomination as General Secretary of the party was not automatic. He faced internal resistance from other candidates. However, his control over the party machinery and his network of loyalties allowed him to consolidate power quickly. The first years of his leadership showed a reformist facade that deceived both internal and external observers. He freed political prisoners, temporarily relaxed censorship, and adopted independent positions with respect to Moscow. These measures earned him domestic popularity and international recognition, creating the image of a reformist and nationalist communist. The turning point came in 1971 after official visits to China and North Korea. Ceaușescu was fascinated by the models of Mao Zedong and Kim Il-sung, especially by their total control over society. Upon his return, he promulgated the July thesis, which marked the beginning of a radical transformation toward extreme totalitarianism. The thesis established iron ideological control over all aspects of cultural and social life. Media was subjected to absolute censorship. Arts had to strictly follow principles of socialist realism, and any independent cultural expression was prohibited. The educational system became an indoctrination machine where children learned to venerate the leader from the earliest age. The construction of his public image reached absurd proportions. He granted himself titles like Genius of the Carpathians and Supreme Conjugator. His face appeared on bills, coins, and public spaces throughout the country. Parades became elaborate spectacles where thousands participated in mass choreographies that celebrated his wisdom, diverting massive human and economic resources toward pure propaganda. The surveillance network he developed penetrated every aspect of social life. Churches, schools, factories, and families were infiltrated by an extensive network of informants. Any expression of dissidence resulted in arrests, brutal interrogations, and sentences to forced labor camps. Fear permeated all Romanian society during the 1980s. Ceaușescu's economic policies brought the country to the brink of total collapse. His obsession with paying external debt resulted in massive exportation of all national production, leaving the population without basic foods, fuel, and medicines. Severe rationing was implemented that reduced the average diet to survival levels. Basic services were systematically devastated. Electricity was restricted to a few hours per week. Domestic heating was practically eliminated and hot water was limited to 1 day weekly. Hospitals and schools operated without basic resources, resulting in a dramatic increase in infant mortality. Official statistics recorded 40% increases in infant mortality between 1982 and 1986. Simultaneously, Ceaușescu undertook megalomaniac projects that drained massive resources from the national budget. The People's Palace, begun in 1984, became the largest administrative building in the world. Built at the cost of demolishing more than 10,000 dwellings and displacing 40,000 residents from Bucharest's historic center. The destruction of Romanian cultural heritage was systematic and brutal. Hundreds of historic churches were dynamited. Entire neighborhoods of traditional architecture were razed, and the urban fabric of centennial cities was replaced by uniform communist blocks. These demolitions not only destroyed national heritage but displaced entire communities toward peripheries without basic services. Ceausescu's growing isolation during his last years in power created a bubble of unreality that completely disconnected him from the country's real situation. Surrounded by flatterers who hid the truth from him, he developed a distorted vision of his popularity and the nation state. His untreated diabetes and deterioration of his mental faculties aggravated this disconnection. Even when communism was collapsing throughout Eastern Europe during 1989, Ceausescu maintained absolute denial of reality. While the Berlin Wall was falling and communist governments were collapsing one after another, he continued organizing loyalty parades and promulgating repressive policies. His speech at the 14th Party Congress, held days before his fall, showed complete disconnection from the historical changes developing around him. The tragedy of Ceausescu's regime lies not only in the brutality of his methods but in the systematic transformation of an entire nation into an instrument of his megalomaniac fantasies. Romania, a country with abundant natural resources and rich cultural tradition, was reduced to a failed state where basic survival became a daily struggle for millions of citizens. The state terror, economic destruction, and architectural megalomania that characterized his regime created a system so fragile that it collapsed in a matter of days when the population finally lost fear. The Revolution of December 1989 was not only the end of a dictatorship, but the violent awakening of a society that had been maintained in a state of artificial nightmare for decades. Elena Ceaușescu, the doctor without a degree who governed with fury. Elena Petrescu was born in 1916 in a peasant family without resources, receiving only primary education before working in a textile factory in Bucharest. Her encounter with Nicolae Ceaușescu in the clandestine communist movement would change not only her personal destiny but the course of Romanian history. What began as a romantic relationship would transform into one of the most destructive political alliances of 20th century Europe. Her initial political ascent was gradual but constant. After the consolidation of communist power in 1948, Elena began as a minor functionary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Her true influence began to manifest after 1965 when Nicolae assumed party leadership. In 1973, she was designated member of the Politburo, becoming the first woman to reach the maximum organ of power in Romania. Elena's most notable transformation was her reinvention as scientist and intellectual. Despite lacking formal university education, she was named professor of polymeric chemistry at the Polytechnic University of Bucharest. This appointment was made through an internal procedure that completely ignored normal academic requirements. Her doctoral thesis titled Stereospecific Polymerization of Isoprene was written by researchers from the Chemistry Institute under direct political pressure. Internal documents subsequently revealed showed specific instructions to complete the work before important party dates. This systematic academic falsification extended to multiple industrial patents on polymers, all attributed to Elena but developed by subordinate scientists. In 1980, her appointment as vice president of the State Council granted her rank of interim head of state according to official protocol. Simultaneously, she presided over the National Council of Sciences and Technology, a position that allowed her to control all national scientific research. Archives reveal that Elena authorized budgets, approved or vetoed research projects, and determined the careers of thousands of Romanian scientists. Her control over the scientific community was absolute and vindictive. Researchers who indirectly questioned her academic credentials were transferred to irrelevant positions, fired without explanation, or in extreme cases arrested under fabricated accusations. The Romanian scientific system became an extension of her personal ego, where adulation replaced merit as evaluation criterion. The manipulation of her public image reached obsessive levels. From the 1970s, Elena appeared in official magazines and government posters with titles like Mama Aupori, Mother of the Nation. Profile photographs that showed her less flattering facial features were prohibited. All her official representations were frontal portraits with carefully controlled lighting. The maternal cult built around her figure permeated the national educational system. Romanian children had breakfast in front of Elena's portraits, and school authorities had to organize monthly ceremonies to honor her maternal work. Textbooks presented her as a protective figure who watched over all citizens' welfare. Her influence within the Politburo quickly surpassed that of any other member except Nicolae. Memoirs of surviving functionaries describe her as the most influential voice after the General Secretary. She acted as controller of crucial political decisions, exercising veto over ministerial appointments, legislative reforms, and ideological control over state media. Internal correspondence from the secret police reveals the extension of her power over the repressive apparatus. Her name appears in intelligence maps as key character for moral alignment of state cadres. She received up to 10 daily reports on military and civilian activities, personally supervising surveillance operations against functionaries suspected of disloyalty. The systemic nepotism that characterized the regime's last years had Elena as its principal architect. Between 1975 and 1989, the Ceaușescu family received at least 17 important official appointments. Vladimir Ceaușescu was designated ambassador to Greece. Marin Ceaușescu directed the Export-Import Bank, and Zoya obtained academic positions without appropriate credentials. This family network extended to nephews, brothers-in-law, and distant relatives who occupied ministries, municipal administrations, and research organisms. The propaganda apparatus constantly promoted the image of the revolutionary family, publishing photographs of Elena with children, female workers, and model rural families that reinforced her image as benevolent matriarch of the state. Her personal behavior contrasted dramatically with the carefully constructed public image. Functionaries who worked directly with her described her as dominating, cruel, and despotic in dealing with subordinates. She had the habit of publicly humiliating ministers and officials during meetings, creating a climate of psychological terror in government's high spheres. Testimonies from domestic personnel and escorts reveal an obsessive personality with protocol and recognition. She demanded that all functionaries address her as doctor or academic comrade, titles she had obtained fraudulently. Her fits of rage were legendary among those who knew her, especially when she perceived any lack of respect toward her supposed scientific condition. During the regime's last years, her influence over Nicolae intensified notably. She attended all important Politburo meetings, interrupted deliberations to impose her point of view, and maintained parallel meetings with key functionaries to ensure compliance with her directives. Her power was so recognized that foreign diplomats considered her de facto co-dictator. The control she exercised over state propaganda allowed her to mold the official narrative about women's role in socialist society. Elena presented herself as the perfect model of the Romanian woman. Brilliant scientist, dedicated mother, and committed revolutionary. This fabricated image contrasted grotesquely with Romanian women's real conditions. Her participation in Decree 770 of 1966, which prohibited abortion and limited access to contraceptives, resulted in massive tragedies. Thousands of women died from clandestine abortions, while tens of thousands of children were abandoned in state orphanages where they faced inhuman conditions. Elena publicly promoted this policy as evidence of her dedication to the nation's future. The hypocrisy of her position as defender of workers became evident in her personal lifestyle. While the Romanian population faced severe rationing, Elena maintained an extensive wardrobe with clothing imported from the West, expensive jewelry, and access to luxury food products prohibited for common citizens. During the revolutionary events of December 1989, her behavior revealed the true nature of her character, while Nicolae showed signs of confusion and disconnection. Elena maintained a combative and defiant attitude until the end. Her refusal to recognize the tribunal's legitimacy and her behavior during execution showed a personality hardened by decades of absolute power. Elena Ceaușescu represents a unique phenomenon in 20th century political history, a figure who combined systematic manipulation of academic credentials with brutal exercise of political power. Her transformation from textile worker to co-dect illustrates both the opportunities the communist system offered for social ascent and the inherent dangers in absolute concentration of power. Her legacy transcends her role as the dictator's wife. Elena was an active architect of state terror, a conscious manipulator of education and culture, and a central figure in the systemic corruption that characterized the Romanian communist regime's last years. Her death marked the end not only of a dictatorship but of a social experiment that had profoundly distorted Romanian society's foundations. Blood legacy historical rupture after the final shot. The execution of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu on December 25, 1989, marked more than the end of their lives. It represented a historical turning point that would define the character of Romania's transition toward democracy. The events of that Christmas Day would resonate for decades, raising fundamental questions about justice, revenge, and the nature of political changes in Eastern Europe. Barely 2 weeks after the executions, on January 7, 1990, the Romanian parliament approved a constitutional reform that abolished the death penalty for all civil crimes. Ionescu signed this law with a declaration that stated capital sentences no longer correspond to emerging democratic values in Romania. This decision converted the Ceaușescu case into the last precedent of legal execution in the country since 1947. The irony of this abolition did not go unnoticed by observers. Romania eliminated the death penalty immediately after executing its last dictators, creating a moral paradox that would fuel debates for years. Critics argued that this sequence revealed the expeditious and political nature of the trial, while defenders maintained it represented a definitive rupture with the past authoritarian methods. The bodies of the chosen were buried in anonymous graves at Bucharest's Ghencea Cemetery without identifying plaques and with strictly controlled access. This decision sought to prevent their cephalas from becoming pilgrimage places for nostalgic supporters of the previous regime. Only internal reference 115.41989 of the cemetery registry was maintained. For 2 decades, the exact location of the graves remained a state secret. In 2010, following a formal petition from surviving children, authorities authorized an exhumation for identity confirmation purposes through DNA. The procedure was carried out under supervision of the Mina Minovici Legal Medicine Institute, confirming 100% genetic correspondence. Meanwhile, international financial investigations began to reveal the magnitude of economic plunder perpetrated by the Ceaușescu family. Documents filtered from Swiss banks between 2005 and 2007 exposed more than $1.2 billion hidden in offshore accounts in Geneva, Liechtenstein, and Bahamas. These revelations were documented with bank transfers signed by family members. The Institute for Investigation of Communist Crimes published in 2018 a detailed report that estimated the hidden amount equaled more than triple Romania's annual budget for the regime's final period. The document included invoices, bank orders, and transaction records that linked public infrastructure projects to the family's personal accounts. Immediate political changes following the revolution showed both continuities and ruptures with the past. The first multi-party elections were held between May 20th and 27th, 1990, resulting in victory for the National Salvation Front, led by Iliescu with 67% of votes. Although international observers validated these elections as a step toward democratization, the new government's composition revealed profound continuities. The FSN was integrated mostly by ex-members of the Romanian Communist Party and nomenclature that had collaborated until the previous regime's last days. The first ministries included more than 30 high-ranking ex-officials from the previous system. This continuity generated political tensions and student protests, especially during the University Square events in June 1990. The country's geopolitical orientation experienced fundamental changes. Romania formally requested its entry to NATO in 1992, a process that culminated with its adhesion on March 29, 2004. Parallelly, the complex process of adhesion to the European Union developed completed on January 1, 2007. These milestones represented a complete strategic reorientation toward Western institutions. However, the most controversial theme of the Romanian transition was the absence of a systematic process of transitional justice. The Truth Committee about the previous regime's security forces, established in 1990 to 1991, collected testimonies from approximately 7,500 victims of the repressive system. Nevertheless, the translation of these denunciations into effective judicial processes was extremely limited. The first significant judicial process against members of the repressive apparatus only materialized in the year 2000, focusing on intermediate ranking officials who received sentences between 2 and 5 years in prison. The high commands of the surveillance system, including generals and regional chiefs, never faced tribunals. Most files were archived or the accused received political pardons. This judicial impunity contributed to an academic and social consensus that the purging of the past had been insufficient. Many power structures from the communist regime remained active in the new system's security, economy, and justice institutions. Organizations like Human Rights Watch systematically criticized this situation, arguing that the lack of accountability compromised democratic consolidation. The symbolic impact of the televised executions transcended national borders. The broadcasting of images on December 25th to 26th, 1989, provided a potent symbol of communism's collapse in Eastern Europe. For international audiences, the scenes of Nicolae and Elena at the foot of the wall represented the dramatic end of a historical era. The sequence of events from the failed speech to the execution became reference material for historians, political scientists, and documentary filmmakers. The trial in Targov was analyzed as an example of summary justice in periods of political crisis, generating debates about the legitimacy of extraordinary procedures during democratic transitions. With the passage of years, the official narrative about December 1989 events experienced multiple revisions. Subsequent investigations questioned aspects of the dominant discourse about the spontaneous revolution, suggesting elements of political manipulation by factions within the regime itself. These debates fed conspiracy theories and political polarization that persist to the present day. The gradual opening of classified archives revealed the complexity of revolutionary events. Declassified documents showed internal communications between Communist Party factions, suggesting that Ceausescu's fall could have been facilitated by internal groups seeking to preserve elements of the system under new direction. The economic legacy of the Ceausescu regime continued affecting Romanian development for decades. Obsolete industrial infrastructure, environmental devastation, and inherited external debt created massive obstacles for transition toward a market economy. The privatization of state enterprises was a traumatic process that resulted in massive unemployment and the collapse of entire industrial communities. The extreme austerity policies implemented during the 1980s had left profound sequels in public health and demographic structure. Infant mortality rates, malnutrition, and preventable diseases required years of investment in health systems to be corrected. Restrictive reproductive policies had created a generation of abandoned children who faced massive social problems during transition. The destruction of urban cultural heritage during the 1980s left permanent scars on the Romanian landscape. Bucharest's historic center, devastated to build the People's Palace, was never reconstructed. The loss of centennial churches, traditional architecture, and historic neighborhoods represented irreversible damage to national heritage. In the international arena, the execution of the Ceausescus generated contradictory reactions. While some Western governments expressed relief at the end of one of Europe's most repressive regimes, others criticized the summary nature of the judicial process. The lack of procedural guarantees contrasted with international legal standards that Romania aspired to adopt. The Romanian case became a reference point for debates about transitional justice in other post-authoritarian contexts. Academics and specialists analyze the costs and benefits of different approaches to accountability, comparing the Romanian model of immediate execution with more gradual processes implemented in other Eastern European countries. The political polarization generated by these events persists in contemporary Romanian society. Sectors of the population maintain nostalgia for aspects of the communist regime, especially job security and social services, while others consider any relativization of the past as betrayal to the dictatorship's victims. Historiographical investigations continue revealing little-known aspects of the regime and the 1989 events. Recently opened archives have provided information about the extension of state surveillance, civil collaboration networks with the repressive apparatus, and economic mechanisms of resource extraction that financed the communist elite's lifestyle. Official memorialization of revolutionary events has evolved considerably since 1990. The Revolution Memorial in Bucharest's Revolution Square inaugurated in 2005, represents an attempt to institutionalize official memory. However, debates about the memorial's design, location, and message reflect broader tensions about how to interpret and remember this historical period. The generational impact of these events is particularly significant. Romanians who lived through the communist regime maintain traumatic memories that influence their contemporary political perspectives, while younger generations know these events primarily through media and educational narratives that often simplify historical complexity. Romania's European integration has provided institutional frameworks to address the authoritarian past's legacy. EU adhesion requirements included reforms in human rights, governmental transparency, and judicial system strengthening. However, persistent deficiencies in these areas have generated European monitoring mechanisms that continue to the present day. The debate about the nature of the process that led to the Ceausescu's execution reflects broader tensions about the legitimacy and effectiveness of different models of democratic transition. While some analysts argue that the dictator's rapid elimination facilitated political stabilization, others maintain that the absence of a comprehensive judicial process left unhealed wounds in Romanian society. The audiovisual documentation of the execution continues generating ethical debates about the limits of transparency in transitional justice processes. The televised images serve to confirm the dictator's death and provide psychological closure to regime victims, but also raised questions about human dignity and civilizational standards in justice administration. The Romanian experience of post-communist transition illustrates both the possibilities and limitations of dramatic political changes in authoritarian societies. The regime's violent fall permitted a clear symbolic rupture with the past, but the continuity of elites and institutional structures limited the scope of real systemic transformations. The blood legacy of December 1989 remains as an ambivalent reminder of the inherent complexity in political change processes. The executions of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu simultaneously represented an act of popular justice, a deficient judicial procedure, and a powerful symbol of the end of a historical era. The question about whether the events of December 25, 1989 constituted justice, revenge, or simply a political necessity of transition remains without definitive answer. What is indisputable is that those brutal moments in front of a wall in Targovist marked the violent end of one of the most destructive political experiments of 20th century Europe, opening a new and uncertain chapter in the history of a nation that had suffered too much under the weight of its last dictator's totalitarian ambitions. Documentary conclusion. The documentary's final images return to the brick wall in Targoist, now silent under Romania's winter sky. In this place where one of Europe's most oppressive regimes brutally ended, history wrote its final verdict on Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu. Their bodies fell here, but the weight of their destructive legacy would continue oppressing Romania for decades. December 25, 1989 was not only the day two dictators died. It was the moment when a nation exhausted by terror and privation recovered its voice. The executions transmitted on television sent an unequivocal message. The era of fear had ended. However, as subsequent history would demonstrate, ending a dictatorship is only the first step on the long road toward genuine freedom. The brutal reality of those last moments in front of the firing squad revealed the true nature of those who had governed Romania with an iron fist for a quarter century. Stripped of power, wealth, and repressive apparatus, Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu were reduced to what they had always been: two ordinary individuals whose excessive ambitions destroyed the lives of millions of their compatriots. Their violent death closed one of the darkest chapters in European history, but also raised lasting questions about justice, revenge, and appropriate methods for confronting political evil. In history's annals, their execution remains as testimony both to the fragility of absolute power and to the final capacity of oppressed peoples to reclaim their destiny, no matter how brutal the price of freedom mays.